Hi, you're watching SuccesSoul Conversations with me, Vicky Paul. I'm an intuitive, an artist, and an author, and I am passionate about sharing people's inspiring stories. I set up SuccesSoul Conversations, which is based on my new book, How to Be Successful, to help you connect with your soul self through the inspiring stories of others who've done the same. Today's guest is Behnoush Babzani. She is a social entrepreneur, a public speaker, life coach, and author. She has survived 2 rare life-threatening blood disorders and a bone marrow transplant by employing unique and innovative life tools and a positive mindset. She's the founder and executive director of the non-profit organization Project Marrow, and she shares her experiences and tools to help others find emotional health and well-being. Just as the world went into lockdown, her first book, Hold On While I Hang On, was published. It's an inspiring true story about beating insurmountable odds. It's full of hope, and it's a memoir about Behnoush's extraordinary journey.
Hi, Vicky. Thank you so much for having me in that grand introduction. I appreciate that.
But we have to let people know who you are, what you're all about, because it's a pretty grand story. And before we get into talking about the kind of crux of the story, which was your illness, I just want to ask you what you were like as a child before all of this happened.
Okay. Ooh, that's a unique question. So as a child, I think luckily I've been able to carry some of that into where I am now. But I believe, as my memory serves me, I was pretty carefree, right? So, and later on in life, I found out that there were so many things happening around me, but I was a child, and I was just entirely present. I was entirely in the moment, and I could only enjoy what was in front of me. I didn't necessarily have the weight of other people's problems or concerns on me, as I wasn't able to, I guess at that point, really need to build on it or remain with anything that happened. So I was always told to, okay, be quiet. I was very loud. I was very energetic. They always asked, how much sugar does she eat? I was always trying to get as much as I can into every minute of the day. So that was me as a child.
So pretty positive then.
I believe so. I believe, just depending on what age, until what age we get into, I can't recall, anything that I would say, I wish I would have been more, or I could have been a little bit more. I think that I did it. I lived it the way. Sometimes I wish I could go back and be so carefree. That would be lovely.
So how old were you when you first become aware that things weren't right, that your body wasn't working, or you felt unwell? And was it something that you were aware of, or was it something that your parents picked up on first?
I think that, so I was 12 years old. So I was in 6th going into 7th grade. I was 12 years old, and I started noticing, it was in class. One day I was in class and I had my hands like this, and my friend looked down and saw bruises covering my arms. And she said, what happened to you? And I quickly hid it, and I started wearing long sleeve shirts because based on her level of fear, I wasn't scared. I was scared of her reaction. I started to hide things. I started to hide them from my parents until they realized that wild child girl was tired, was laying on the couch, didn't want to go out, didn't want to do anything. So there was a drastic change in my behavior. And so once they saw that, we went straight, to the doctor, and that's where they pulled these huge diagnoses. It's leukemia, it's this, it's that. And I didn't know anything about leukemia. As a 12-year-old, the only thing I knew was the kids on the TV who didn't have any hair, they had leukemia, and I wanted nothing to do with that. Right. So it almost, to say what I felt at that moment, but the parents and my community really stepped up around me. Things that I was never allowed to do, like have McDonald's. Suddenly McDonald's was at my doorstep. So they made me feel comfortable. But when that diagnosis came in, it was not leukemia. In fact, it was aplastic anemia. And aplastic anemia, the doctors who were working on my case at the time basically said that it's a pretty rare disease, and it's one that they personally had not worked on before, but they were gonna, it was a children's cancer center, and they were gonna do the best that they could. And so basically it wasn't that my body was creating cancerous cells. My body, my immune system, my bone marrow was creating none of the cells that I needed to be able to function. So no red blood cells, my oxygen level was low. So get up from here to there, you're exhausted, right? No white blood cells. I didn't have an immune system to protect me, anything that would happen, right? Or platelets. So if I were to cut, which is why I was bruising easily, or if I were to cut, get a bloody nose, it would just continue and continue. So I had to get into this tiny little bubble, right? I didn't have an immune system to protect me. So I had to leave school. I had to, cut ties with any friends because I didn't have any white cells to protect me. But at 12, so when you ask how was your childhood, as terrifying as when I looked at the faces of the parents and adults around me, they looked terrified. But what I felt inside didn't quite match, what the doctors, they were so serious, quite match. But I did look to my mom, who had the very no, this is not how, we're going to do this. We're going to approach this however we need to. But it was almost a blessing to have it at that age of 12, because to me, it was an adventure. To me, I didn't have to go to school. I went to the cancer center. They had lollipops, they had popsicles. There was a team of people who had all this attention on me. And so I was still, again, stuck in the day-to-day, which a child does. You remain in the present versus the grander, what does this all mean? Am I going to live? Am I going to die? Right. So that was the first interaction with that first diagnosis that I believe supported me later on in life when all these other events were going to take place.
So what happened? I mean, you mentioned when you first, your friends had first noticed that there was, blood in your forearms, and then you sort of started to cover up your arms and withdraw. What was going through your head as a 12-year-old? Because 12-year-old nowadays, I know from friends, having kids, we unfortunately don't have any kids, but they're pretty old at 12. They are pretty mature nowadays. You kind of have a strong awareness and a strong sense of who you are. So what was going through your mind, if you can remember, when you withdrew? What was the kind of choice pattern in doing that? And what was that because of?
Yeah, I think that, going through my mind again, it was a little bit of a disconnect, because it was what I naturally was feeling versus what the people around me were feeling. And that was a huge disconnect. And so I thought maybe that, at that point, when maybe there was something wrong with me, why are they so worried and I'm not? And I'm talking about the doctor's team and the community versus my internal, because my mom, who was my caregiver, obviously, my mom, my dad, and my brother were, no, this is, we're going to handle this. I think the weight of it really hit me when I was 19, because it went away through, and we could talk about that through, I ended up, the medication wasn't working, and they pretty much told me you have to sustain on blood and platelet transfusions. I was getting blood and platelets every 3 days just to be able to continue. But the treatment wasn't working, and they told me you need to have a bone marrow transplant. And in 1996, bone marrow transplants were not as successful as they are today. It was very dangerous. And so we heard about a man who had leukemia, and he went to a healer, and the healer healed him, and now he's a healer. And my mom's like, we should go to this person. And I thought it was just pure comedy. I said, Mom, University of San Francisco, these great hospitals can't help me, and you want me to go to some guy who's going to do voodoo to me? So that was
sorry to interrupt, but I'm just going to press, because your mum's obviously key to this story.
Very much.
And energy healing in 1996 is not quite as accepted as energy healing is now. We've really moved forward in terms of that. So was she, or is she, a more spiritual person than your average mom would be, or was this just literally desperation from her point of view that she would try anything?
I think by my level of shock when she brought it up, she had never said anything about that before. I think it was a mother who had been told there's nothing else we can do for your child, and she was not going to accept that answer, and she was going to do whatever she had to do and try anything, whether she believed it or not. She was going to do it. And
but tell us what happened then when you met this energy healer.
So we met him, and, I'm thinking I'm going to meet, a lot of this is in my book. And so I'll give bits and pieces, because I really dive into it. It was a very fascinating, it was just a very fascinating part of my healing journey. but I thought there was going to be a man with a long beard and a wizard hat, and I don't know what he was going to do. And I saw him, and he was this very kind and very normal looking person who, you know, he had this room, and he said, "This is where I'm going to heal you." And I was like, okay. Like the whole time I'm laughing, and my mom's like nudging me because it was expensive. No one was really doing that. So he was, you know, and he was charging. And so it was just, the whole thing was comedy. And then he would have me lay on this table. My mom was, you know, right next to me, and he said, "I'm going to send you energy." And I was like, cool. You know, like I just would sit there, and sometimes I would fall asleep, and I'd wake up, and my mom's kicking me like, just, and so I worked with him for many months. The first month was just going to him and laughing until, and I highlighted again very clearly in my book, my body began to respond. Mm-hmm. There was no way to deny what was happening.
Was that an awareness you had? Was that a physical feeling, or was this with test results that were better than potentially they had been? How did you know it was working?
The combination. So at that point, again, I was getting blood and platelets every 2 to 3 days, and I was getting labs done every 2 days because they needed to know, does she need more blood? What are we doing for her here? Right. And so he asked me, can you please cut all intervention? Meaning at that point, I was taking just like some immunosuppressants and the blood transfusions. He said, can you cut all that? And I couldn't cut the blood. I mean, that was really what was holding me. And I said, no, you know, we can stop with it. They wanted to try another trial. We said, we won't do that. We'll do this. But I was still getting my blood and platelets. And so he would do things. He would create visualization techniques for me. And he kept saying, you have to use your third eye. And I was like, dude, I only have 2 eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. And he's trying to create the third eye in a 12-year-old. And he was just always, you know, whether I did it or I didn't do it, he was like, he knew what he was doing. Mm-hmm. And with the combination of his wisdom and then my mom's want, you know, the wanting that my mom had, and then me just finally surrendering, I felt at one point like I jumped up off the table, and I felt like someone took a cigarette butt and just burned it right here. Mm-hmm. And I held my forehead screaming, and I thought he did it. And my mom looked at me, you know, shocked. And they said, oh, look, I left a mark. And he said, congratulations, you opened your third eye. Mm-hmm. And so from there, I was able to receive a lot of visualization techniques. I mean, from 12 years old, I was introduced to healing, to meditation, breathing techniques, so many mindfulness practices that, I mean, the weight of that, because so many other things, unbelievable things kept happening to me throughout my life, that really set the foundation for how I was going to handle all that later.
What did you do? What was the kind of introductory practice as a 12-year-old when you talk about visualization? Because anybody watching that's got kids, you know, this is an amazing opportunity to find out, you know, how they introduce it to their children.
Oh, it was an entire lifestyle shift. It was from the way that we spoke to the people we surrounded ourselves with, to what we, you know, the language in our head. I mean, everything had to be shifted. And he was also a very strong believer that we position ourselves for things to happen. I think the more general talk about it is manifestation. He says positioning it. Oh my gosh, I left such a third eye mark on myself. But really it was that. And he would, you know, and I detail it so much in my book, but even to the point where, you know, he told my mother, I don't want one person who has sympathy to come near her. Mm-hmm. So if we had a family friend who was like, oh, I'm so sorry you're sick, that's poison, right? That's toxic, that you're putting that energy on me, releasing me from the position of power, making me into a victim, feeling sorry for me, when in fact, when you're a patient or when you're going through something so painful and so challenging, you're the strongest then than you will ever be than on a Tuesday sitting on your couch watching, you know, TV, right? So don't look at a patient or someone who's going through a challenge with sympathy, right? Look at them like, wow, you are gathering everything you need. So again, he made us control our environment, who was coming around, the language that we spoke, right? We would speak in what we want versus what we didn't want. We wouldn't allow the doctors, right? Doctors said, well, she has a 25% chance of dying. Oh, so you mean a 25% chance of 20. stuck on my brain. They would focus on the negative. It's still early. I haven't even had my coffee this morning. They would focus on the negative, and he said, shift it to what the positive was in anything, right? In any version of it. And then visualization was simple as that week, my platelets were low. And he would say, do you know what a platelet looks like? And I said, I have no idea what a platelet looks like. So he took out a picture of a platelet and he said, this is a platelet. And I want you to inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale. And he told me how to count my breath. He told me how to inhale. He told me everything. And every single time I was going to double this platelet count. And then I was going to triple it. Mm-hmm. And then I was going to make it more and more and more. And every single time, and we have that, he still has a book in his Grand Sheffield Healing Clinic right now. He has this amazing space. And he has my little book that has every single blood test that show it went higher and higher and higher to the point where the doctor said, you're healed. You know, like it happened, mm-hmm. Go on. And I said, bye. You know, it wasn't time to marinate on it.
Sorry, Dana, did you remain positive throughout this whole experience, or did you dip? Did you falter, or did you keep focused?
At the age of 12, I was a reflection of my surroundings. So my mom was positive, I was positive, right? At the age of 19, when it came back, the level of loss was so significant that it wasn't the same as when I was 12. I was 19. I was a makeup artist for MAC. I was going out with my friends. I had an adorable boyfriend. We were partying. I had the life of a 19-year-old, right? And the moment I got diagnosed, every single one of those was taken from me, right? Mm-hmm. So my friends freaked out. Oh God, if they knew me from the first time, oh God, it's back. We remember how bad that was. They were shaken up and they needed to tend to themselves. I had to drop out of school. I had no immune system, right? I couldn't go to work anymore because I would be doing makeup for people and I have to run to the bathroom to take a nap. I was so tired. I would take a nap in the bathroom stall, or I was in people's faces. So, and then the boyfriend, right? There's a whole thing about the boyfriend in the book, right? How it's like, oh, you're going to die. I'm going to live. This is too much, right? So that level of loss was way more significant than when I was 12. Mm-hmm. And even though it was the same team, right? My mom still maintained, I hadn't seen her cry through this experience. There was evidence of her crying in the book that I talk about, but I personally hadn't seen it happen. Mm-hmm. And so they had built this shield around me of positivity. But either way, I still felt that loss. I still felt the loss, the social loss, and then the hair loss, right? You go into chemotherapy, and even though they say it's just hair, I told myself it's just hair. It's going to come back. But then that just hair falls, and suddenly, just like that, I was one of the kids on the TV that I didn't even, as soon as that channel would come, I would change it. Mm-hmm. Now I was that kid, right? Now I was that person. And so that I did, I felt it. I felt that. And it was everything you can imagine. And then 10 times more, right? The being in isolation. So I think right now, a lot of people are understanding isolation, right? Because the second time I was diagnosed, this time there was like, let's not talk about treatment. You need to go straight for a bone marrow transplant. Mm-hmm. And my brother my brother was my donor. So what that meant was they were going to completely empty out my immune system with chemotherapy and then introduce my brother's bone marrow, hoping that my brother's bone marrow doesn't realize it's in a foreign body, because if it does, it can start attacking my organs. And that was the biggest danger, right? That's where I could die. And so I was put into isolation, an isolated floor, an isolated room, double doors. Anyone who wanted to, I was only allowed a certain amount of people to come in. They had to wear a mask. They had to cover their hair, a gown, wash their hands, right? No physical contact. And so being right now in isolation I'm like, this is cake, right? This is, you have to do what you have to do. But the powerful part, I was able to find a lot of power in this, right? Because the thing that helped me the most was, first of all, accepting my situation, that no matter how much I kicked and screamed and threw a tantrum, I was in the hospital, I was in isolation, I was about to get chemotherapy. No matter whether I denied it or whatever was happening, I was there. So,
sorry to interrupt. Did you have any kind of spiritual awareness at that age? Because at 12, probably not. You were just, by osmosis, were positive because of, everybody around about you. But between the sort of age of 12 till you got to 19, was there anything, did you explore the energy healing any further? Did you explore that from a spiritual perspective? And did you have any sort of spiritual thoughts around the fact of why this has happened again? Because surrendering to, you know, to what's going on in your life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, is very much a spiritual practice, you know, and taking responsibility for it. But was that, yeah, I guess the question, did you have spiritual inclinations at that time, or was it just, there's nowhere else to go, so I'm going to just surrender?
Between the age 12 and 19 diagnosis, I made a conscious effort to run, don't think about it, right? Whatever post-traumatic stress somebody wants to call it. I wanted to not think about it. I even forgot it as a piece of my identity. And until one day in college, someone was like, tell me the coolest thing that's happened to you. And I said, oh, I worked on a radio show. Forget the fact that I was healed by a healer and I went through. So I really tried to put that away. So for whatever reason, it positioned itself back at 19 was, I wanted to be a lawyer for the FBI. I was in college to be a lawyer for the FBI. I confused, right? Where I wanted to do, what I wanted to, who I wanted to be. It was that 19-year-old, what am I doing, right? What are you doing with your life right now? And then the positioning of these events coming back, right? Whether I attracted to myself or however that happened, but it coming back submerged me back into that world. So right before I went into the bone marrow transplant, I connected with my healer again. And I said, listen, they're telling me I have to go in for the transplant. And he said the same thing. He said, don't go in, I can work with you. But at that point, the fear had saturated us, right? We were like, no more healing, we have to go. So he said, that's okay if you don't want to, stop it. I will work alongside you. And so with the support of him, with that barrier, that I always call it vitamin F, vitamin friends and family, that nourishment, that level of nourishment, who you allow in that circle is very powerful. Mm-hmm. So I am a product of the people around me and the thinking around me because they've been carefully chosen. And a lot of the ones who weren't serving me were let go, right? The people who thought, oh, she's going to die. Oh, she's going to be this, right? And so after accepting the situation and actually allowing myself to say, fuck this, right? Get mad. Like, what's going on? I had long, beautiful hair. What the hell, going through it. And I'm in the hospital. I should be in college, but I'm in a hospital. I should be out with my friends, but I'm in a hospital. It's Super Bowl. I remember it was the whole Super Bowl thing. Everyone's out there doing this and I'm here, right? Okay, we get it. I allowed myself a certain amount of time to just do what I needed to do. And then I needed to step into a position of power because as a woman, as a Virgo woman, I find myself, I do like the comfort of control. And when the external world is completely out of my control, I no longer had control. They would tell me what time they were going to come and poke and prod me. You have to be on this medication now. You have to do this now. We're going to do this treatment. We have to place a catheter in your chest. It's going to be uncut. So I was like, okay, I'm just sitting here letting them do whatever they need to me. So I was out of a position of power. So how can I regain my power? So externally, I had no power, but internally, I had complete control of my mindset and where I was going to direct it to.
Who told you to do this and how did this come to you to do this? Was this off the back of the energy healer? Or did you?
So this was... The person in that room, my assigned caregiver was my mom, right? Again, not many people were allowed to come in. So she came in every morning, 8 a.m. and they pushed her out the door at 8 p.m. She had to leave. And so she was my, mirror. As soon as she would see, I would go this way. What would, the master healer tell you? What did you learn from that? And it's like, okay, oh yeah, I know I have tools to do this. Okay, wait a minute. When they're putting the needle in me, okay, remember your deep breaths. Remember, how did he tell you to breathe? What do you need to visualize right now? So she was that mirror, the reminder of, wait a minute, I do have all these tools to pick and choose from. And sometimes, right, I was on really heavy medication and I couldn't do it. So then I had to rely on that external support with that. I was going
to ask you, you took the words out of my mouth. How did this all work with the medication? Because I presumed you'd have been on painkillers as much as anything else.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So that's when, and that's why I say, and some people have strong reactions to it. I believe that sometimes in some cases, it's harder for the people looking in on the patient or on the person going through the trauma than the person, because if the chemo was burning me, I'd hit the medication button and suddenly I was free. But my mom was looking at me and magnifying the pain that I was in for herself. And I wanted to say, no, Mom, really, I'm not in pain. Even though I'm bald and I look crazy, I'm not in pain, right? So there was a period that I call the dark period that I just don't remember anything, because I was on so much medication. But then there was a shift where, okay, my body was starting to respond. And there was like 3 weeks of being in the hospital, having your mental space back, being fully aware, and then just being stuck, right? And this was during a time, if you can believe it, there was no Facebook, there was no Instagram, there was no social media, there was no, let me just turn my attention onto my phone. There was none of that, right? So I really had to pull to support my mind. And I would say, when I get out of here, I'm gonna go ahead.
I was going to say, did you read any books? Because that was back in the day when we read books to entertain ourselves, or listen to cassette. What did you do in that time? Or were you literally just you and your mind? Or did you find inspiration elsewhere?
Yeah, I did. I couldn't read book. The chemo made my eyesight very sore, and there weren't too many like audio books available that would interest, a 19-year-old still talking about that wisdom. I couldn't hang out with my friends. I couldn't do that. We would bring music, and to the point where the neighbors would be like, turn down the music, right? My mom would create an environment. We turned music on, we would dance, but I had a list. I made a list of everything I was going to do when I got out. Not that I hoped to do or needed to do. It was what I was going to do. And that's where, putting myself again in the position of power is that not only do I have these tools, but this all happened perhaps for me to serve in some way. And that's where in the hospital I learned that, well, I wanted a bone marrow transplant, and I called my brother and he gave me his bone marrow. But that's not how it works, right? There's thousands of people in the hospital in need of a bone marrow transplant who don't have matches. So I wrote on this list, find everyone's match. And somehow that turned into a nonprofit organizations. I started Project Marrow, where we go into communities and we educate them about what it means to donate bone marrow, because some people think it's the most terrifying thing on earth, when actually it's just a blood, right? It's kind of like donating blood. They take it out of one arm, they take out the stem cells, and they bring the rest back to you and you donate it. So it turned into, well, what are you going to do about it now? Right? You're here.
Sorry to interrupt. Before we get to that, because this is the thing that I think anybody watching will be interested in, because when you're in the mindset of things are challenging, negative, overwhelming, can't get out of your own way to make that switch, and I know that you as a public speaker, you do a lot about positive mindset and getting people into positive mindset. But for anyone watching, was it something that happened to you? Was it an external thing that happened to you, that you just woke up one morning and just went, well, that is it, I'm going to make the changes? And if so, what was the dialogue in your head that went on when you decided, right, that's it, no more negative, no more overwhelm, I'm going to change my mindset? What did you do? Can you remember?
So ultimately, why is this happening to me? I can't believe this is happening. I want, wanting to be, when I say this over and over, I'm talking about the position of power, because all of that was a choice. I got to choose. It was only going to be my choice. As much as my mom wanted to say, no, it's going to be okay, everything's going to be fine, I could have, that was going in one ear and out the other, until again I chose to accept my current situation, allow myself to go through it, and then make a choice. I had a choice whether I was going to move forward, say, I'm going to heal, I'm going to get out of this, and I'm going to use A, B, and C to do that. And so I believe that ultimately life and death. So it's not, okay, how do I say this? Because I try to, life and death, if I was going to die, then I was going to die. Some things are just like that. It's not as simple as like, well, my negative thinking made me die, right? But in that time that I am alive, right? for myself to strengthen, because I do believe I really did have the power of negative thoughts and emotions. And I knew what that did to me physically. And I know still to this day, when I start thinking and I start spiraling, immediately it either shows up as a physical reaction or something really bad will, position itself in front of me. And I believe that. I believe I can attract that. Mm-hmm. So if my mind, in fact, is that powerful, why am I choosing to stay in this style versus let me now shift it completely and attract the things that I do want? Okay. Because somehow I position this to happen. And this was a conversation with with my healer. And so it was a lot of reflecting.
And it's taking responsibility for everything that's going on in your life. And interestingly, I talk about this in my book, that it's everything that's happening to you is by you and for you. You have chosen all of these experiences. And that's sometimes a really tough pill to swallow if it's a really difficult experience, or there's violence, or, just something that's awful, 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 rather than just, and I don't want to say just day-to-day worries. Everybody has challenges that they go through from a day-to-day on a day-to-day basis, particularly with everything that's going on just now. But it's that taking responsibility, that everything that's going on in your life is happening for you, by you.
Right.
And was that something that your parents or your mom had taught you, or was it through your energy healer?
It was a combination. Like I said, there was a team, who you pick and choose to put around you. There's a team of it, but I do credit, my mom a lot for it. And actually after all of this, she was working in childhood education. And then after all this, she went and got her at her, older age, went and got her degree and became a licensed clinical social worker. And now she's a psychotherapist, because that's exactly what she should be doing, right? Talking about a shift in path.
I love this, because this is, when you have conversations with people about why do bad things happen. Bad things, when you're, a spirit being, there's no such thing as a bad and a good experience. It's just an experience. And off of what we perceive to be a bad experience, your illness, your mum changed direction, retrained, and look at the amazing benefits that she's now offering other people.
Right.
So the ripple effect is always, I love hearing stories like that. She sounds like an amazing woman.
Thank you. Yes, she is. She is. And she's really, I'm blessed and to have been positioned with her and been positioned as her daughter. That's been a blessing. And so being able to move forward, right? So that's the biggest thing, is that there's a choice to remain in where you are. And ultimately things around you echo that, right? The way whatever you're feeling or you're thinking, your surroundings are going to begin to echo that. And so when we did shift into healing, we shifted into movement, and she would say, make a list of the things that you do want to do when you get out of here and that you will do and how realistic they are, right? So I started to create that of what I wanted to do. And I wanted to start this nonprofit to help people. And as soon as I got out and I started getting better, somehow, hospitals were asking me to come share my story. Cancer centers were asking me to share my story. Medical schools, dental, because the dentist was the one that kind of ultimately found out the second time around. And so that suddenly it was a call to share my story. And I never realized the power of a story, because as a kid, as soon as an adult would start talking, I was the weird one that would sit down and just start listening, right? Because stories were so powerful, so powerful. And I really do believe that every single person, if they can, and if they, I'm happy to support them if they need to, but really should write a book, really, really should share their story with the world, because it serves as something, right? It serves as something. Maybe I had a block and I didn't realize it. And because you did that, that might activate a new style thinking for me. But I wanted to share my story. I decided to write a book. And then it's almost like this healing was applied. It wasn't just when it was major things. It had to be applied to various things in my life. And after the second diagnosis, there were 3-4 other really critical life events that kept happening to me, like over and over. At some point, my friends just didn't even want to answer their phone. They're like, I don't know what you're going to tell me from now on. And I did have to have a conversation with my healer and say, what's going on, right? It wasn't, I don't think I ever sat and said, why me? I didn't really remain with that.
Okay.
But he was more like, well, why not you? And why are you positioning yourself for this stuff? And again, that put me back into the position of power. And I started to see the last few events that happened. It's like, oh, I did do that. Like I did play a role in attracting these sequence of events to happen. So how can I now shift that? And then, so then I became a certified life coach, turned into a mindset coach. And so I work with people. I work with, anyone who's going through a challenge. You have a challenge in front of you, and this is all that you see. And I help you see, right, that you're not a victim. You're not in the backseat of your own life. If you're not waiting for someone to come fix it, you need to open the door, get into the driver's seat, activate that part of you, make a choice, and create that change, because it's the power that you have in the self, right? So when I do this, how? With the mindfulness practices that I've been taught since I was 12 years old, right? Meditation, visualization. I have a coaching, professional coaching certification, right? And I've created programs alongside my psychotherapist mom. And we bring these, these programs to people who, again, feel stuck, and they need to, from the inside out, shift their thinking, their speaking, their environment to create the change. And it's just so beautiful when I see it happen, because it's very empowering, right? You don't need to wait for someone else to do it for you. Grab the tools, come over. There's so many tools around us. There's you, there's me, there's so many people who have their stories that can serve as tools for us to get to exactly where we need to be.
And it's interesting. I had another one of these conversations with a woman called Christy. If you haven't watched it, it's on YouTube, Christy Sanborn, and she is an inspiration guide. And she talks about manifestation and the law of attraction. That's kind of her thing. And she talks about the fact that so many people try and manifest and positive, use positive affirmations and change their language and wonder why their life isn't changing. But what they've not done is do all the internal work. And, oftentimes, we don't get these big life experiences, these big life events that you've got, that I've had, that really forces us to start doing the internal work. And it's interesting. So I just want to touch on, you talked in your sort of publicity material that there was a period in your life where you weren't sure if you were going to be able to be a mum yourself because of everything that was going on. And this is something that I can relate to. And for my own reasons, I had fertility issues and kind of put it off and thought, well, there's plenty of time for that. I'm not interested in having a family. And then met my husband, and we ended up having a number of miscarriages and subsequently not being able to fall pregnant. But I think there's so many people nowadays who have left becoming a mum later in life, and then they are faced with these challenges, which then forces us to consider our roles as women and men, and our sense of self, how we nurture, how we express ourselves creatively. So I just wanted to just let you wax lyrical about that experience, because the fertility challenges are pretty common, more than people realize. And it has a huge impact on, as you know, probably your mental and emotional well-being, about who you are and what you're here to do. I mean, I know we're here to be more than parents, but it's a very intrinsic, back to basics calling within us, is to have a family and procreate. So how did that all, I mean, you can go into as much or as little detail as you want, but I'm just keen to find out what that experience was like for you.
Well, it's funny that you say back to basics, because I was just, to my 2-year-old, I'm trying to explain the difference between a man and a woman without getting, and I said the woman makes babies and the man doesn't, right? And so that's what we bring down our role to, right? His entire thought is that women can. And so when that is not an option, then what are we? Then you really then start to begin to question your role. And I was just, insane. My friends thought I was, from 8 years old, I had my 3 kids' names picked out. I had already had a box of clothes. We go shopping. I'm like, Mom, I want to get this for my kid. My mom tells me now, she's like, I thought you were going to be a teen parent. You were so obsessed with kids. And I just wanted it, and I wanted it. And then, with the chemo they gave me, they said, this is pretty high dose chemo. You're probably not going to be able to have, kids. And I'm thinking, okay, like that, to me, that was more painful than the diagnosis, to tell me I may not be able to have kids. And then afterwards, and like I said, there's a few things that happen in the book, but later on in the book, I was diagnosed with a pituitary tumor in my brain. And they said, well, basically your body thinks that because I was lactating, that your body thinks that you're pregnant. So you can't get pregnant if your body thinks you're already pregnant. And I'm thinking, okay. So that was just like dagger after dagger. And when I met the love of my life, I had to tell him, I had to say, just so you know, and because I want 5 kids, this was the talk that he wanted. And I said, I want you to be prepared that I may not, this may be a situation. And then I realized they're telling me I'm not going to have kids. And I said, you can't tell me I'm not going to become a mother. I may not give birth to those kids, right? I may not do it the natural way, but one way or another, and I quote in my book, come hell or high water, I will become a mother. I will become a mother, whether it's whatever I have to do on the face of this earth. Right. So even if I had to get a dog and call that dog my baby, whatever I had to do, I will create that for myself. And it was terrifying. It was terrifying. Again, a feeling of being removed from the position of power, that you're not going to have kids, to shifting that mindset, and that I will one way or another be called mom, or I will, there will be a way in there that what I'm willing to do and sacrifice to get what I want and what I need out of the situation.
You sound like you always had a strong focus, even as a young child, of what you wanted, or what your life experience was going to look like. Do you think that somebody who doesn't, because not everybody has that sense of self and vision for their life, whatever that may be, whether it's a mum, whatever job it is, etc., do you think that you can use the power of positivity to the extent that you did if you don't have that vision for what your life may look like? Because there's different people, different personalities, and not everyone's, I'm going to do this, and come hell or high water, I'm doing it. People are like, well, who knows? I don't know. I still don't want to know what I want to be when I grow up. So do you think you can still manifest in the same way, still use the positive energy in the same way, or not, because it's too much like hard work? Because it is. I mean, anything that I, experience, and anytime I speak to anyone who's had, I would call these experiences spiritual experiences, because it takes you back to basics, and it really reconnects you with who you are and what you're here to do. But not everybody is that way inclined, and not everybody has that strength of power. So I guess, can we still shift the energy if we're not so solely focused on it?
I love this question. I love this question so much. And I pondered and I spoke with my mom so much about it, because are you born a positive person, or do you become a positive person, right? Whatever that, means. I believe that I became a positive person. I believe my mother is the entire, what the definition of being born, a positive light. I believe she was born that way. And I believe that I was not. And I'm not entirely sure who I would have turned into if these events that needed to trigger me to shift hadn't taken place.
You'd be working for the FBI.
I would have been working for the FBI, and I'm not going to lie, I kind of wanted to be a little, I was 15, 16. I wanted to be a corrupt lawyer for the FBI. How many movies did you watch? Let's thank everything that I did not become one. But so many, that between diagnosis 1 and diagnosis 2, I was a monster. Like, I wasn't the spiritual, I wasn't thinking and saying and speaking the way that I am now. I wanted to forget what I went through. I was almost angry at it. I was very quick to respond. Anyone who would say something that didn't, I agree with, I would attack. My mom, oh, this is stupid. This is right. Every part of me was completely not aligned, right? Just not aligned. It wasn't happening. So who I am after those versus who I am before is an entirely different person, I believe. And I've had friends be like, we'd be in a social situation that normally I would pop off, or I would say something, and they're like, who are you now? Who is this person, right? Who's now calm, who doesn't react, who now chooses to see what I need to see, right? And so is it easier to be angry? Is it easier to be upset? And I don't really believe in negative emotions, because I believe if it's an emotion that naturally comes up, it should come up. It's not negative. I do believe in negative thoughts, that they might translate up here and remain here and become the stories that we tell ourselves and become the beliefs that we tell ourselves. So these things that happened to me and these tools that were literally put in front of me have allowed me to practice what I need to survive the things that I can. Because afterwards, like I said in the book, there's a list of things that kept on happening afterwards. I was in a really bad car accident. I almost lost, this arm, this hand just so many things kept on happening that I needed that mind space to be able to continue, even to this day, even in a pandemic, stuck at home with 2 kids, fighting all day long, right? So big things, small things, can you shift your mindset and become a positive person? I'm gonna put this little, disclaimer. Without a formal mental diagnosis, yes, you can. Right. So if you have something that you have a chemical imbalance, you do need medication for, then I'm not saying everyone on earth can be a positive person. I do understand the world of, mental health disorders and diagnoses, and those do need to be attended to. This can be alongside it. This can supplement it. But without all that, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Once you decide to make the choice of whatever situation you're in, you look at it and you see, this is not serving me. These thoughts are not serving me. The words I'm speaking are not serving me. The people around me are not serving me. Then what do? I'm going to make the choice to shift it. How do I do that? There's books, anyone in your book, my book, their book, right? There's books, there's practices. I have, once a month, I'm doing my clarity workshop. So it's called Radically Shift Your Mindset. To radically shift your mindset to from what's not serving you, you feel blocked, you feel stressed, you feel anxiety. You're just like, every day becomes like you feel almost suffocated.
Because I think, as you said before, we as society, and I can only speak from the UK, and I'm sure it's the same, across the whole of the West, is that you keep a lid on your emotions. You don't express your emotions. You keep all that stuff down. And I'm with you. I don't believe there's negative emotions or positive emotions. It's just all energy. And the more you hold on to that energy and not allow that energy to come out, the worse it becomes for you. And I say worse, that's from the human terms worse, not spiritually. There's no such thing as worse in that capacity. But it will manifest itself as ill health and external situations that then sort of mirror that back to you. So how did you release these emotions? Because, anger is not a bad thing. Fear is not a bad thing. All the sort of challenging energies. Did you do that with the support of other people, or did you go and scream into a pillow? How did you allow that energy to come out? Because there will be a lot of people with everything that's going on with coronavirus feeling anxiety, feeling fear, feeling anger. They've maybe lost their job, when colleagues haven't, they're stressed about money, the future, etc. That energy needs to come out. Otherwise, it's not going to serve them long term. So having been through that process, how did you release that energy and release those negative emotions?
Right. So I think the biggest thing for me before I can let anything out, I have to know, what am I letting out? What is in there that's occupying me, right? And so I say this quote all the time. My friends just start laughing at me at this point, but the famous Albert Einstein quote that if I had 60 minutes to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes focusing on the problem and only 5 minutes on the solution. So if I want to be free from the emotions and the thoughts that are occupying my mind, I have to know what they are. I have to know how they got there so that they don't get there and remain there again, right? So the way our thought process works, and this is something that's amazing, and again, working with a licensed clinical social worker, the psychotherapist mom has been able to, we develop, so we take all the practices that have worked for us, the spiritual practices, we combine them with actually proven clinical frameworks and practices, bring these together. And it's now I know, okay, when this thought comes here, what takes place in my head? Why do I allow some of them to stay and some of them to go? And as long as they're staying and stacking up and use the word occupying this space, there's no clarity. I can't see what the answer is. I can't see what the solution is because I'm so clouded. Mm-hmm. So once I need to just figure out what they are, how they got there, and why I choose to hold on to them, right? So that's a thought process. And then it's a matter of mindfulness practices and breathing techniques where I meditate and I visualize myself releasing them. And I do this with my private clients, one-on-one clients. I do these techniques with them and show them, how they can do that. And they feel so powerful. Like, whoa, I had a client the other day who I'm talking to her and she had an anxiety attack. And by the end of it, she was feeling, she was free from the thoughts that were not serving her anymore.
And it's interesting you talk about, and I love the way you framed it, when these thoughts come into your head, why do they stay there? Why do you hold on to certain ones versus, chuck other ones out? And that's really what I'm sensing from this and what I understand from my work and what I do and who I am as a person. This is really understanding and getting to know your story and having an interest in who you are and what your story is. Because so often we live in the future trying to create some form of life based on all the stuff that went on in the past. So we spend our time either in the past, fantasizing, reminiscing, and then in the future, whereas we don't really know what our story is because the future that we're trying to create is, a novel yet to be written. But the backstory, every time you go back the way and every time you spend time in the past, the story changes. Your memory doesn't remember exactly what happens. The memory becomes a memory of a memory and then a memory of a memory. So it's getting to know your story, which kind of ties in beautifully with the fact that you say everybody should write their own book. And I totally agree with you. It's really a way that you can understand who you are and who your story is. Right. As an individual, and then obviously sharing it, which is wonderful. I honestly, I could talk to you all night. For me, it's all day for you. Likewise. On the other side of the world. So thank you so much for taking the time out to have a chat. It is a fascinating story. And I know that you haven't divulged too much, and I love that you've not done that to spoil it for anybody who's not bought your book. So it's called Hold On While I Hang On. Where can people get it? And how can
Hold On While I Hang On. It's available anywhere books are sold. So, and the paperback and ebook version is available too. So if you can find a place that sells book, you'll find our book, my book there.
Because you and I have both got super colorful books.
Oh, I love that.
Magenta, very spiritual color.
I love it.
With that note, I wanted to ask you, it's an interesting front cover. What's the deal with the lioness?
So you'll notice my lioness has a third eye. Yes. Do you see that? So this part is me, and this lioness is my mom, right? So we are, and this aura of healing and community and we call it shafa, the healing around me that protected me. And so basically hold on. The master healer talks about when you're healing someone and you're holding them in this space. And so everyone around me, my community, my family, they held me while I was literally just hanging on. The middle decade of my life was one thing after another. The different diagnoses and events that took place were insane. But so I was really just trying to hang on, and I was being held mostly by this lioness right here, my mom. So it's a dedication to her.
It's amazing. And if anybody wants to, and I will put this, once this goes onto YouTube, I'll put all the details in the comments below, but for anybody who's watching on FaceTime Live just now, how can they get a hold of you? What's the best
you can go to my website, BehnoushBabzani.com, And in the next week, I do have our clarity program, the one I was talking about, where we work on radically shifting the mindset. And if you tell me you're a friend of Vicky's, you're going to get a discount for that program. It's already at the lowest price of the year because it's November and everyone's giving. So it's at the lowest price of the year, but you tell me that you are a friend of Vicky's and you'll go ahead and get even more beautiful discount. And that one starts November 19th. So
thank you. So there's still plenty
on my website.
Thank you so much. Amazing.
Okay, Vicky.
Yeah, listen, and I said I'll put all the stuff in the comments so that you know how to get hold of Behnoush. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I would not do myself any favors if I didn't give my book a shameless plug, which is really weird. You've got to get into this whole, here's my book. If you haven't heard me talk about it, it's a guide to reconnecting with your soul. Similar to you, it's a bit of a memoir, but there's also a lot of guided wisdom in there. So it's a book for anyone who is just at the beginning of their spiritual journey or is aware that there's something going on in their life. They can't quite put their finger on it, but something needs to change. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to watch us have a conversation. SuccesSoul Conversations is over on my YouTube page and on my website. We have lots of lovely guests like this beautiful lady here, sharing their inspiring stories in the hope that you can see some of yourself in them and be inspired by how they have shifted and changed their life. So whatever you got up to this weekend, have an amazing time and we will be in touch.